Okay, good afternoon, good day, whatever time you're watching this discussion and exposition. And I am Chester Manabis. I am a student from UE and Law, and I am here with my professor, Attorney Vian Lawrence Gabato, and we are here to, of course, introduce his latest edition of his books on constitutional law and his primary reviewer in political law. And we're here to discuss some political law stuff. No, we're here to nerd out. Well, of course.
Yes, of course. Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chester. And of course, pleasant day to everyone who is listening to this to this program that we have. Of course, we plan to have of course a discussion and exposition in relation to the books that I have re-released this year. So if you would see, we have here three books. So I have released early this year my first book, Constitutional Law, the Fundamental Powers of the State and Bill of Rights. Okay, then I followed it up with, of course, many would consider it as a reviewer. I would want to consider it as both compromise between a reviewer and a text. So we have here review and observations in Philippine political law. Then of course I have just recently signed the revised edition of my other constitutional law book, which tackles the state and the branches of government. Okay.
Right. First of all, attorney, what made you decide to write textbooks in general, especially in political law?
Of course, I've been consistent saying this during my past interviews that of course I started to start right when, of course, during the pandemic. Of course, I had this there are many things to do during the pandemic. So of course one of them was writing. I thought of course I checked on all of my old notes. Then I discovered, of course, that I have some catalogs in my hard drive of all of my previous notes in all my subjects, but particularly in constitutional law, because constitutional law is actually something which of course I really appreciate. Although, to be frank, of course, in practice, of course, there's not much use of political law except for the Bill of Rights. Yeah. But of course, it's more of the actual practice. Well, it refers to remedial law, it refers to civil law, but political law is seldomly used, especially in litigation. But of course, we always see political law in the general sense of things that are happening here in the Philippines. So you may have heard from news, and especially these days, the importance of political law, because it is usually placed in the forefront of all of the political discussions involving our country in particular.
So parang political law is with us on the daily.
Yes, it's on the daily, but of course, in so far as practice is concerned, they don't really mind that much. But although, if I can recall, last December, I think I was asked by, si Attorney Capila sa Barista Solutions. I told him that of course they should consider political law, because it's something which is important. It's not just because some students would think they're just going to discuss political law after they go to law school. They will just not going to consider political law. No, political law is very much abundant in practice, particularly if you are handling criminal cases. If you know the rights of the accused, you'll be able to properly defend your client. So, for example, in drug cases, we have the chain of custody. Remember that the interpret, of course, depends on how you read the definition of the Supreme Court. In practice, of course, they would tend to read it in a favorable account with respect to the accused. So usually it's a key for them to be acquitted, especially that if law enforcement would not be able to comply with the chain of custody requirements. So that's one application of our constitutional law. Okay? Of course, another example of our application of constitutional law is, for example, the non-payment of debt or poll tax. Of course, we are not really that required to get a community tax certificate, but of course we have to balance it with respect to there might be certain requirements that are needed to why you should pay or why you should comply with your community tax. So all of these things, although it might just be a common events or common instances or in life, political law is very much involved.
Right. Now, since there are all these things of political law with us on the day in our daily lives. What now can we expect here in your new editions of your books when it comes to political law?
Okay, so let's start first with the green one, yung at the fundamental powers of the state. Of course, there are new doctrines that were released by the Supreme Court for the past days, because I first wrote this book and the other one, State of Branches of Government, in 2022. So 3 years has passed. There's a lot of updates. Here in particular, we already added the discussions with respect to social media, with respect to freedom of expression. Because of course, if you can recall, there are cases involving online social media and the definition of a public figure with respect to a social media blogger. So I have included already the discussions in ABS-CBN versus Ampatuan. Of course, there's also a discussion on sub judice in that case. Then of course, the particular case of Inre Lorraine Badoy, where of course one of the aspects there is whether or not the respondent there is liable for indirect contempt. And of course, the Supreme Court ruled that, well, using not only the clear and present danger test but the standard of imminent lawless action, it was determined that the statements of the respondent were contemptuous and she is liable for contempt. So these are one of the additions. Then we also included in searches and seizures, there is now the Supreme Court has well defined already the definition of a search warrant and whether or not an administrative search warrant is allowed. Of course, they clarify that as a rule, an administrative search warrant is unconstitutional, but there are exceptions when it comes to enforcement of customs as well as immigration laws. So if you can recall, there is this recent decision in which the Supreme Court has established guidelines in order for the Bureau of Immigration to assess whether or not there's this validity on the issuance of administrative warrants. So if you read the requisites, there's still an involvement of courts. Then of course, we also added the discussion on whole departure orders, because nowadays the DOJ may ask for a precautionary whole departure order, but again, since a whole departure order is something which is issued by the court, the rules, the Supreme Court crafted some rules which what they did was they said that in order for a precautionary whole departure order to be issued, there must still be an application with the regional trial courts. So there are these formalities. Okay. Now, of course, we have now this sort of review and observations in Philippine political law. Actually, to be blunt, I'm not really a fan of reviewers in a sense, because I always say that you should go back to your textbooks. But I just realized around last year that there is really a need to, there is really a demand for because I have some there are some who requested, why won't I do a reviewer? I just realized how important a reviewer really is. But of course, in this first instance, because of course in advance I'm going to tell you that I think my publisher Central Books would be releasing their own pre-week reviewer. I think they're going to release. I'm one of the contributors there, but contributors of that of their pre-week reviewer. But of course, it's an to be blunt, of course, it's an excerpt of this book, Review and Observations of Philippine Political. Now, what's in store with this in this book? So I was thinking, how am I going to write this book, in a sense that, well, I don't want to make it just as a mere reviewer, but at the same time I wanted to make it as a ready reference. Okay, at least all the details would be included in the book. So I thought of trying to compromise in the middle and try to make a text which may be considered as a reviewer for some who wants to read this book. So actually, I think I wrote in the foreword that, of course, my inspiration in writing this such kind of book would be, the old classics, like for example, the book of Justice Regalado in Remedial Law. If you would see, it is just 2 volumes, but the discussion is, although it's compact, his discussions were concise. Okay,
So we're not expecting Q&A or
no,
outline?
it's not a Q&A. Actually, it's a text discussion
Text
form.
discussion,
Of course, it's more heavily filled with jurisprudence. Yes, I as much as possible, I try to simplify some things that we might discuss in a very, very detailed manner in a textbook. Okay, because of course, I think in law school and in scholarly work, of course, there would always be these works which are short. But of course, there is this importance of reading, of course, the details. That's the reason why we have textbooks. We have also reviewers. Of course, reviewers are catered for those who wanted to have a quick view, especially if they're reviewing for the bar exam. But at the same time, of course, I also consider that I don't want the reviewer to be just a mere reviewer. That's why I had written Review and Observations in Philippine Political Law to cover that need. Okay, if there is a need. Now and then, of course, I have as to be released. Okay, so soon, it's going to be released soonest, because sabi nga forthwith daw, di ba?
Forthwith.
Yeah, so
Our favorite word lately.
yes, forthwith. So of course, I'm going to release soon constitutional law, the state and branches of government. So of course, what's the difference? Of course, the Green Book discusses the Bill of Rights in the relation to the fundamental powers of the state. The Blue Book discusses the introduction, the nuances of the Constitution. Then, of course, more on the structure and powers of government. So, of course, what is a state? What are the elements of the state? Then, how does the 3 branches of government interact in relation to this concept of separation of powers? Okay, of course, when I wrote this revised edition, the 2025 edition, I made some modifications with respect to certain aspects of the book. For one, I made this revised edition. It now includes a separate chapter on national economy and patrimony. Previously, in the first edition, I discuss it in different parts of chapters of the book. So, for example, if there is this discussion on national economy and patrimony in relation to, let's say, citizenship, like relationship of aliens to own property, I included it in citizenship in the first edition. But now I separated the discussion and included some cases for, of course, for the reader, be it the student or the lawyer, to understand the legal implications of of this particular topic. So of course, aside from citizenship, there is this discussion on the exploitation and utilization and development of national resources. There are recent decisions by the Supreme Court which had a discussion with respect to that aspect of national economy and patrimony. Then of course the Filipino First policy, we kind of discuss it in more detail as compared to the previous edition of the book. Then of course we added discussions on the national territory. So if you can recall, last year the president signed two laws, which is RA 12064 and 12065. The first one is the Maritime Zones Act, if I can recall it correctly. The other one is yung Archipelagic Sea Lanes and Air Routes Act. So these are laws which enforced in which the Philippines has enforced the provisions of the UNCLOS with respect to our national territory. Of course, these laws, aside from compliance or conformity with the UNCLOS, of course, this was done in order to support the decision, the previous decision in the arbitral dispute in Philippines versus China. So, of course, particularly RA 12064 made it legal, or made it as a law, our rightful claims under the decision in the said PCA decision in Philippines versus China. Okay, so then of course there are other addition. I added some jurisprudence. Of course, another discussion would be in both the books. I had this discussion on pardon. Okay, there are case updates with respect to pardon and amnesty. I think the recent decision is that if the president cannot just take away or cannot just revoke an amnesty, because of course, number one, it's an exposed it can be considered as an exposed facto law. Okay, so these are some of the updates that you would see in this latest iteration of my books in constitutional law. Okay.
You've mentioned two new laws on national territory. Can you tell us more about it? RA 12064 and 65.
Okay, so RA 12064 is the one which emphasized our rights over the decision in the with respect to China. So of course, if you can recall the PCA arbitral ruling, we have rights over certain areas, and applying the regime of islands, we were able to emphasize our rights over certain islands and reefs, despite the fact that some of these reefs are now currently occupied by China. Okay, so but of course, in order to enforce everything, okay, so we passed the laws. We passed the maritime the Maritime Zones and Maritime Baselines Act. So it sets our exclusive economic zones. I'm just saying is the law made it into law what was made as findings in the Philippines versus China dispute. Now, of course, in RA 12065, that's the archipelagic baselines and sea routes. So if you can recall, in UNCLOS we have archipelagic lanes and sea routes. So if you can recall, as a rule, under the UNCLOS, we have this concept of right of innocent passage in UNCLOS. As a rule, if you're an archipelagic state, you cannot limit the passage of vessels, because the vessel or the state passing by may invoke the right of innocent passage. But in the provision on right of innocent passage in the UNCLOS, there is this requirement that unless there would be a setting of sea lanes and air routes, because when we speak of innocent passage, it can be by the sea, it can be also by the air. So when we so unless the Philippines would set proper air routes, but of course what the UNCLOS is saying is that the country, the state may impose designated areas in which traffic may pass through. If not, they can be considered as arrested within internal waters. So there must be an express provision of the law. So this is the reason why we had our RA 12065, so that there is a setting of the sea lanes in which foreign vessels may pass through. They already set three sea lanes by default. Of course, this is without prejudice to assigning sea lanes in the future, but there are already sea lanes that are now designated by the law. So in the book I of course, using government resources, I included as an appendix in order for everyone to understand what are these archipelagic sea lanes that are now assigned. Okay. Then of course the importance there is, if a state would be doing an activity outside that designated sea routes, of course the state like us, the Philippines, can enforce our local laws because they're outside that sea lanes. Because if you do not have any assignment of sea lanes, of course the foreign vessel can invoke right of innocent passage. But here, since we already have the law, they cannot invoke right of innocent passage anymore. Okay. The same goes to air routes. Of course, there is this compliance with, I think, the Chicago Convention, with all of this. Of course, this is more or less the provisions. Okay, so we would adopt the Chicago Convention in some of the interpretations. Then, of course, the purpose of the law is, of course, since we can enforce our laws within the non-designated sea lanes, of course, there is this prohibition on military activities. There are certain provisions which are prohibited, and there is a corresponding criminal penalty or sanction that the Philippines may impose for foreign vessels or foreign vessels or aircraft who would violate the law itself. Okay.
Let's move on to another
Yes,
topic.
let's move forward. Okay.
Academic freedom. Again, especially now, AI is on the rise, and a
Yes.
lot of students trust AI. I don't. Yet.
AI is so young, actually.
It's very young. Although the technology existed way before ChatGPT existed, Siri, all that stuff. But the question now in regards to academic freedom is, how can schools embrace the use of AI if they wish to do so?
Well, AI. I'll tell you a short story. This is just my issue with AI. Sometimes the problem with students is when there is technology, we tend to surrender everything.
Okay.
I think my issue is this. I have no problem personally, of course, as a professor. I have no problem with AI per se. Okay? Actually, some schools are now using AI for thesis, I heard.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, there are some schools would allow a certain percentage of their thesis work as you can get, as of course they just have to cite it, but they can use the aid of AI. Okay? Because you can depends on the perspective. Of course, most of the literature on AI is more on the pernicious side of AI. If you can recall, I think that's the issue. It's more on the pernicious side of AI. Like AI would steal jobs. AI will steal. But of course, we're talking about academic freedom. Of course, the focus on academic freedom is is AI being used to cheat like that?
Yeah.
Okay, used to cheat, used to plagiarize.
Yeah.
That's the issue on AI. Now, of course, insofar as, let's say, answering the exams, okay, this is just my issue. I think AI is a tool. It's a good tool.
Okay.
It's just like, I always tell my students, technology, technology develops, it evolves. Like, for example, I'll just share to you, 20 years ago, when I was in law school, I'm happy that there are these online case like Chan Robles and Lawfil. Because if we're going to do the old way, I'm just going to borrow this scra over here. Okay? Sometimes we Xerox the scra, then we'll end up with stacks of scra Xeroxes on my house. Diba? So,
Minsan pag madamot pa yung kaklase mo.
diba? Ayaw magpahiram na scra.
Ayaw magpahiram.
Diba?
O, di...
Yes. No, when there was Lawfil, I have to relate it because this was the time that we do not have high-speed internet. We have now high-speed internet, of course. There are still people who complain with our internet. I think it's fair naman. But remember, if you compare our internet speeds today, it's much slower 20 years ago. I was able to experience using a modem. So, whenever I'm going to download cases through Lawfil or Chan Robles, I'm going to search all of the cases. Then I'm going to pull the modem cord so that the card that I'm using won't be charged. Okay, that's one thing about technology. For me, that's already an improvement, as opposed to you're going to Xerox all of the scras. Okay, of course, if you're in the library, you can always use the scra, but at least if you're on the move or you're at home, you will have the comfort of using your technology because it's accessible through the internet. The same goes with AI. It's a tool. It's just that we have to use it properly. Like for example, some students would do let's say I ask a student to do a paper research. Problem with some students, they do not review. They just put their assignment in ChatGPT. They just cut and paste it hook, line, and sinker without reading it. I think there's an importance of reading your work when you're going to submit your assignments because number one, especially if we're in law, there's this concept of ito favorite ni Attorney Ople to there's this concept of phantom searches.
Yeah.
You don't know, you're going to cite a case, but the case that ChatGPT would give you is there's no such case.
No such case.
Yes.
Which occurs most of the time. I just have to tell you that.
Yes. You cannot just rely on AI to search you the scra citations because sometimes, and not only sometimes, most of the time, remember, simple lang ang rules ng computer, di ba? GIGO yan garbage in, garbage out. Whatever's inputted feed by the AI, it came from humans. So the output is reasonably also a result of a human source, even if it's difficult. And if that's going to be a human source, there is this thing called information overload also. So I think we have to see how things are going to develop with respect to the AI. But I think some should embrace it as a tool. Just using it properly. It's just that I think we should I think help students realize that they should use it properly. How are they going to gain advantage? Because for example, if you're going to do AI for research, there is a need for you to, of course, double your research. Don't rely on your AI. You improve your research skills, be it physical research skills using a book or online skills.
Which makes AI a tool.
Yeah, it makes AI a tool.
Mapipilitan ka mag-research ulit.
Yes, I think that's a more plausible thing to accomplish with respect to AI.
Yeah. Ayan. Okay, so if you're going to embrace AI, do your research. Do your research, kids. Okay. Impeachment. Very hot topic. Mainit-init pa.
Yeah, it's Even nowadays, it's still as hot as hot.
Mm. No, actually wala pang entry of appearances eh. May ano agad eh. Kakainitan pa sa Senate.
Actually, I've been bombarded with questions in my radio program eh, sa DCXL eh. So sometimes if you're listening to them, of course they came from different, perspectives, because
Apo.
I always tell my students in constitutional law, I always say to them, always during the first day, you have to distinguish your politics from political law. Political law is different. Of course, political law refers to the law itself, but of course politics would always have its colors and biases eh. So
Exactly.
so in law school we have to we have to examine the law. We cannot just resort into just siding on things that we hear, even if these sources might come from experts.
Yeah.
It does not stop you from trying to be a critical thinker when it comes
Exactly.
to the law. I think that's the purpose of law itself.
Apo. That's why when it comes to these types of you really still have to read the law.
Yes, if I can recall, I've watched a Cambridge lecture before in online. So when the past few years I've not really a fan, but I'm interested with the work of Finnish international law professor. He used to work here in the ADB sa Asian Development Bank, si Marty Cosconiemi. So I listened to one of his lectures. Actually he's a critical legal, ang school niya critical legal thinking siya. So in this, it's not naturalist, CLT siya. So but of course I have as much as possible kasi I want to listen to naman to all sides because I when it comes naman to philosophy right now, I am quite eclectic or Grotian to say the least. So there was this lecture he has this lecture in Cambridge. So when he was lecturing, he pointed to all of the law books, because of course with respect to politics would come and go, but the law is permanent. That's what he said. So that's something that had an impression on me, that the law, that's the reason why the law is kept in these books. Here we have here the SCRA, we have here all of these books here right now in Central Bookstore, because the law has permanence. All of the views, all of the legal disquisitions, that is something which is etched in stone, figuratively, and that is through these works, these books. Of course, these are cases. Of course, these are my contributions to that permanence that is the law. Okay, so impeachment, of course, it's a very complicated sense, because I understand the Supreme Court doesn't want to intervene much. I think it's good that there is this concept of judicial restraint. And they're just letting the both houses of Congress do their thing. Of course, it's just frustrating at times, because there are things. I think the houses of Congress should be able to reach a compromise, because at the end of the day, they should cooperate in, let's say we wanted to have an impeachment trial. They have to ensure that it should be followed. Now, of course, there are accusations that the Senate is not doing its thing. I believe it's not the right direction for Congress to do so, because you're just creating more friction. If there would, I think the more prudent thing for the House to do is to just follow without whining, because what's happening is everyone's whining. Even the Senate, I can attest that both houses are whining. The Senate is whining because the Congress is not compliant. That's why they returned the articles. Now Congress is whining because they felt they did enough. I think as members of Congress, of course we have the impeachment trial. We know that of course the Senate has the role of judges, while of course the Congress has this role as prosecutors. I think they should be able to discern what are really their functions. And it's like parang sa court system natin, di ba? If you can recall yung criminal justice system, even adversarial ang public attorney's office or lawyers for the accused and the prosecution and the courts. Although there would be, of course, it's natural, it's a court, but you see, it's seamless. No one's really whining. We don't see the courts or those in the members of the dun sa pillars natin ng criminal justice system. We don't see them whine. Diba? We don't see them whine. But what's happening in Congress, they're whining with each other. More often than not, if they're going to whine with each other, that is going to be accomplished. I would not be surprised that it's not going to come from one of them who would go to the Supreme Court. Maybe a citizen might come to the Supreme Court to challenge what they are doing. Exactly. I think that's something that that Congress should be wary of, because no one's stopping a citizen, no one's stopping a taxpayer into filing a mandamus or a certiorari. Now, depends if the certiorari or mandamus would compel them to discontinue with the impeachment or to continue with the impeachment. That's another story. But the point is, if they're not going to settle their conflicts, I mean, I can see they're just doing this for pride. Exactly. I think that's something that they should they should really talk with each other instead of sniping themselves with lawyers. What's happening now, it's getting adversarial between them. I think that's not the objective that the public wants to see. They wanted an impeachment trial. They should discuss it clearly. They should have an open mind. Okay, so whether or not there would be an issue on constitutionality or unconstitutionality, let's just let things go legally. It's just that I just don't want that this might end up in, remember, in the impeachment of Erap Estrada. Although there's a change of government, that is something which is not within the constitutional parameter. I don't want that to happen again, especially that since EDSA 2, I think the interpretation of the Constitution is stable, to say the least. But if we're going to let's say they're not going to agree with each other, how are they going to solve the problem? Is the people agreeable in what they're going to raise their hands? But I think the Filipino people is at this stage that they should, hindi lang, it's not that too demanding, but I think they should demand more from our public officers rather than watch them do some things that people might think otherwise.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap up here. So
Yes.
if any one of you viewers here is curious on political law, even if you're not a law student, I highly recommend getting the books of Attorney Vian Lawrence Gabato on political law.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so thank you, Chester, for gracing this interview, a review, a discussion and exposition on my book. So of course, I have to shout out ba? So of course, my books are available at centralbooks.com.ph. My books are available physically here at Central Bookstore. Of course, we have here in the main office here at Quezon Avenue, and Central Books has other locations. aside from Metro Manila, we have Central Books has locations in Cebu and Davao. Okay, then aside from the physical stores, my books are also available via online. So be it in the Central Books official website, then we also have Central Books also has these online stores in Shopee and Lazada. I hope that if you're going to purchase books from Central, you buy it from the official Central Books website as well as official Central Bookstores, because I would assume that there are some third-party sellers. I don't know if there might be a possibility that this might come from spurious sources. So of course, in line with other authors, I am encouraging you to buy original. Okay, I hope that you do not encourage piracy. Okay, so that's the no. So here I'm introducing to you all my 3 books for political and constitutional. I hope that you'll be able to appreciate, to those who's going to buy these books, I hope that you'll be able to appreciate and you'll be able to help you understand better constitutional and political law. Okay? So, are we going to wrap up now?
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So, thank you very
Right.
much again, Chester. Okay? So, any last words?
Go read your law, kids.
Yeah. See you around.
See you all around.
Tata.